Hello, my name is Juliette and welcome to my knitting podcast episode 6. I'm a knitter based in Cambridge normally, and I love to talk about all things knitting, and today I have a very traditional knitting podcast for you where I talk about finished objects and works in progress. So for today's episode I actually have one finished object to talk about and 3 works in progress. Let's dive straight in. So I have been quite busy knitting and I haven't finished too many things. So as I mentioned, I only have one finished object to show you today, and it's a pretty small one. And that's because I've been working on pretty big projects on the side, which I've already mentioned in my previous podcast episode. But let me talk first about what I finished. So these are my red cashmere penny gloves. Now they're already looking quite kind of misshapen and used because ever since I finished knitting them about 6 weeks ago, I've been using them non-stop because the weather got quite cold here. Oh, and I also got my jacket stolen in a bar which had my gloves in them in the pocket, so I was in desperate need of some new gloves basically. Thankfully they weren't knitted gloves, so I didn't lose a precious knitted item. But basically, a few weeks ago, I went to Save the Yarn, and they sell recycled, refurbished yarn, essentially, like dead stock from industry and whatnot, and they turn it into recycled yarn for knitting. And so I bought 11 balls of this really wonderful red cashmere. It's a bit confusing in the name because it's called green cashmere because it's green as in recycled, and it's 100% cashmere, but 51% of it is recycled, and it's got 125 meters for 25 grams. And so basically it knits up to a sport / light DK gauge, which was perfect for the penny gloves, which also in its suggested yarns, it suggests Cardiff cashmere, which has got a similar profile to this one. So I thought it would be a perfect match for these. I bought 11 balls of this to basically make a set of gloves, hat and scarf. I'll talk about the hat later, it's one of the works in progress, but the first thing I finished was the gloves because that's what I needed most urgently. So this is a pattern by Petite Knit, and maybe before I dive into the pattern I'll keep talking about the yarn. It's actually my first time knitting with 100% cashmere, and at first I think I was a bit worried about handling it, so my knitting was a bit slower, and also the grip on needles is very, very slightly different from what I'm used to with wool. So I kind of had a slight adjustment phase, especially when I was just knitting this part of the first glove where I was just going in the round. And then I got used to it pretty quickly, so I really enjoyed knitting with this in the end. The yarn is so soft. I mean, cashmere I think is really worth what it is, especially this one. I'd say it's a little bit cheaper than your usual cashmere price. I bought it in Swiss francs and it was on sale, but it's usually 12 francs, which is about £10, and I bought it for 10 francs on sale so about £8.50. For cashmere, that's a really good price because Cardiff cashmere goes usually for £15 in the UK at least. They have an international website and the shipping fare is a bit high, a bit steep, but if you're buying a large quantity of cashmere, then perhaps the difference, even with the shipping, might be worth considering versus getting the full price Cardiff cashmere that's £15 per ball. So I highly recommend this yarn. Highly recommend the brand's ethos as a whole. I really like the idea of using recycled yarn and dead stock yarn in my knitting. It makes it a bit more sustainable, for all the good reasons. This is I think a really worth a look at. So interesting at first knitting experience, which I quickly got used to, and the finished product is just so soft. I actually didn't block this. I just kind of started using it straight away. I think with accessories as small as this, I didn't really feel the need to wet block Maybe I could have like steamed it because I do have a steamer, but I didn't. And I mean, honestly, with cashmere, I think, especially ball cashmere like this, as opposed to cone cashmere, which tends to have spinning oils. With cashmere like this, I think it's so soft straight off the bat that with something as small as this, where you don't care too much about the shape, you don't really need to like wet block it as you would, for example, for a jumper, where you do want to wet block to make sure you get the right shape for your jumper, for example. I've got through this in the snow, because it recently snowed in Europe, if you followed the news. I got slightly worried because I had a lot of snow on my hands, and then I proceeded to not let my gloves dry and just shoved it back in my coat pocket. And the next day I was worried that maybe I had kind of felted it by doing that, but it was absolutely fine. Looks good as new, and the yarn at least. Yeah, I'm really happy with this project. It's been super useful. So this pattern is by Petite Knit, as I mentioned. It's probably one of her most popular patterns, right? It's such a simple glove, and she still sells it for like, 50 kroner or 35 kroner or something. Maybe I could have gone without buying the pattern, but I just didn't want to fuss around. I actually already knitted this once for a project that I gifted, where I added some mock cables as inspired by Florence Miller's patterns. I think it was the Mountain Walk socks. I liked the mock cables that had, so I added it to the penny gloves. But this is my first time just doing plain penny gloves like this. Now I did modify some aspects of the pattern. So in the pattern, it asks for a certain length to knit for the wrists, but I did it shorter just because I reached a point where I could put it on just to show you what it looks like. It already goes quite long into my arms. So I think this was about 10 centimeters of wrist knitting before I started the thumb increases here. And then I also made this part longer. So the pattern asks for it to be 2.5 centimeters shorter than I did, but I really wanted to make sure that my pinky was almost fully covered. So the normal pattern, I think, would be more like around here, essentially. So you have a bit more freedom of movement in your fingers, whereas I go more like this to make sure that my pinky is covered almost fully up to the last knuckle, essentially. So that, when I'm typing, for example, it does have a slight restriction in my movement, but it's fine, like I can deal with it. And yeah, I just really wanted to prioritize warmth because yeah, I just wanted to have some warm hands. And I did the thumb length. I don't think I even followed the instructions for the thumb length for the thumb hole. I just did it until, again, I reached the last knuckle of my thumb, and then I cast off. So other than these tweaks with length, I just kept everything as is from the pattern, and I'm really, really happy with this. When I finished knitting these, I had, at least also in my last video as well, I had really deep red nails, and I think that matched really well with the gloves, and I'm tempted to go back to that nail color again for the winter. It's been a really trendy color, actually, the deep burgundy. So this was the penny gloves, and let's stay with the same yarn while I move on to the works in progress. To talk about my next project, which is the same yarn, but I'm making an Oslo hat out of it. I started this a while back, and I've put it on pause to prioritize another project which required the same needle. I will talk about it later. But this is probably, so how many Oslo hats have I made? I've made 3 Oslo hats so far, so this is my 4th one. The previous Oslo hat I made was also actually a red one for a friend who we basically had a joke where he had a red scarf and red gloves, and I was like, all you needed is a red hat. And so I made that for his birthday, and he was quite happy about it, I think. So this, is my second red Oslo hat now. Again, knitted with the Save the Yarn green cashmere, with the idea of making this whole red set. And it's going pretty fast, but then I've put a pause to it. So I'm in the very first bit where I just do, what was it, roughly 20 centimeters of stockinette knitting before I do the rim fold. I've done this pattern so many times now that I feel like I could do it off memory alone. It's a staple pattern for a reason, right? But I also never made myself a hat that I've worn. So I'm quite excited about having this whole red set. Also because I realized that the whole reason why I wanted to make this red set was because all my outerwear is very neutral, and I have some less, my wardrobe is generally neutral. Like, that's not, I'm not gonna pretend it isn't. But also in particular, my outerwear is very neutral. While for jumpers, I do have some that are more colored, although you're looking at this clothes rack and you're thinking, what are you talking about? But for example, with this beige trench coat, right? Or my black leather jacket, I thought it would be so beautiful to have a pop of red, which I know was such a 2023 trend, but I think it's very timeless to have a pop of red regardless. And so that's how I started the whole red thing. The red penny gloves, the red hat hopefully soon, and then I will do a red scarf at the end. For the hat, I'm following the Oslo hat pattern, and for the penny gloves, I did that pattern as well. For the scarf itself, I'm quite inspired by the look of the scarf in the Vienna set from Petite Knit, but I don't feel like buying a pattern for what is essentially just a long tube. So I think what I'm gonna do for the scarf is I'm gonna follow the same trick as in the penny glove for the edge of the fabric, which is just you cast on and then you do a row of purling before you continue with stockinette. And I'm gonna do that for basically the length of my height, which is what is usually recommended for the length of a scarf. You want to match your height. And so just knit a long tube, just like you do at the start of the Oslo hat, but just go a lot further, and then finish off with a round of purling, then cast off normally. So yeah, I think this is going to be a good plan. And in terms of the width of the scarf itself, I was looking at the Oslo hat and I thought this could be, like, I want to use this as a reference for the width of the scarf itself. I think this is a bit too wide. I think I would want it to be about this wide. So taking off about a quarter, a third of the stitch count from the, the Oslo hat's cast on number. Yeah, I think that would work quite well. And so I had to have a scarf like this, about this width. So yeah. But I'll finish the Oslo hat first, because basically what I want to do is I want to use the yarn, all the yarn I need to make the Oslo hat, and then I'll knit the scarf with all the yarn that I have left. So it took me about 1.5 ball of this stuff to make the penny gloves, and I'm estimating it will take me about 3 of these to make the Oslo hat. So I will have a remaining, 4.5. I will have a remaining 6.5 balls, because I bought 11 to begin with, to knit the scarf. So 6.5 balls of 125 meters. So that's about, that's about 850 meters. Yeah, that should do it. That should do it. All right, now moving on to the next works in progress. So this is my big project, and the most important one actually, the one I'm most prioritizing for the, I have been the most prioritizing for the last few weeks. So this is actually a gift knit, and it's the April cardigan, which I had already talked about in my previous video. Now, the kind of focus and the light is making it so that the black looks a lot lighter than it actually is, but I mean, in real life, it's like it's a normal black, right? It's just that the light is a bit overblown because of the contrast it's creating from this light source and this. But anyway, so this is how much progress I've made on it. Hold on, I'm getting tangled. This is how much progress I've made on it. So I have almost a full sleeve. I just need to do the ribbing, and I'm knitting up the ribbing part of the body. Sorry, it's a bit shapeless right now because I'm mid-row, so I can't really... Yeah, every time I knit a cardigan, it's a bit difficult to show it on camera because until you've blocked it, the edges of your front bands are all curled in, so it's a bit difficult to see what it looks like. But here it is. I've tried it on for myself and I really like it. And I wish I thought about knitting myself one of these before. Honestly, I think I just might knit myself an April cardigan, which will be my third one, because after this project, I have to knit another one for another friend. And then I can start thinking about knitting one for myself. So, details. This is the April cardigan by Petite Knit. Sorry, it's a bit of a heavy, Petite Knit heavy video today, but it is what it is. The April cardigan, it's one of her also very famous patterns. The construction is very interesting because it features kind of a tailored sleeve construction with a mix also with some raglan. So you start off with, I think it's called English tailoring or something. It's a bit of like a mini saddle shoulder where you just do increases on both sides to create this panel at the top of your shoulder. But it's then very short because then you immediately start knitting increases to shape the sleeve, while you don't do any increases for the front, so it's kind of straight. And then at the end, you increase raglan style in both sides of the raglan stitch to create the shape that goes like this in a garment. So it creates a very tailored garment essentially. And then you just knit back and forth for the body after separating the sleeve and casting on under the arm. And then you finish off with 10 centimeters of ribbing, and I'm about 4.5 through. It takes a lot of time. And for the sleeves, it's a very gradual decrease, very subtle. It's not very dramatic, the way the sleeves taper in. Actually, they don't really taper much. It's just every 8 stitch or so you do some sort of decrease. So yeah, you could see the decreases here. Very subtle. And then same thing, you finish off with about 6 centimeters of ribbing. Now, the main thing about this project for me is that I'm knitting it in a completely different gauge from the pattern. So I'm knitting it with a 26 stitch gauge when the original calls for 21 stitch. And that's because I'm knitting it with a fingering weight yarn, which is the Knitting for a Live Merino in the color Licorice, which is just black. And it's been a very interesting progress. Obviously, it takes a lot more time. And I was supposed to finish this last weekend when my friend visited me, so I could gift it to her because her birthday was over a month and a half ago, and this was supposed to be a birthday gift. And honestly, yeah, it's just, I completely underestimated the amount of time it would take for me to knit something at a 26 stitch gauge. But I have to say, I think the product is well worth the effort, because it makes for such a fine garment. It's so soft, so light as well. Basically what you would get from a store-bought jumper, I suppose, or a cardigan. It looks really, really fine. The camera is making the black yarn pick up every single bit of dust it has, but I promise you in real life it's not that it's not that dusty. It's just the camera that's emphasizing all the little bits of fluff from different projects that this ended up collecting. But yeah, so I told my friend I will probably need about another couple weeks to finish this off. The sleeves take about 3 days to knit, and I have a 3-day weekend this week, so I can work on that. The really daunting task though is to do the front button band, which I'm intending to do in double knitting, like a lot of people have modified from the original pattern. So the original pattern is just like a ribbed button band, and a lot of people have ended up doing a double knit button band, which I think looks more polished, more timeless. Knitting this up in Knitting for Olive Merino. This is a yarn I've sort of worked with previously. Have I? Actually, yes, I have. I knit a summer top, the camisole number 9, with it, and I really enjoy just how soft it is and how easy to knit with it is. It's not as splitty as Sandnes Garn Sunday, which is, I think, its rival / contender if we were to compare like to like within these brands. I mentioned in a couple previous videos, when I knit the mixed rib cami using Sandnes Garn Sunday, I said that it was a bit more rustic than the Knitting for Olive Merino. And I stand by that statement now even further, having knit this and having tried it on myself and just feeling it as a garment as well. It's not blocked yet, and yet it still feels so wonderfully soft, and I just can't wait for it to be blocked so it becomes even softer. So I think that's really a true testament to just how good this brand is. And I think, yeah, as much as the budget is a bit higher for Knitting for Olive, I think it's well worth the price that you put into it to make such lovely, luxurious looking garments, essentially. If you're going to be putting this amount of time and energy into a garment, and you have to make concessions, I would say do less projects but with higher quality yarns than more projects but with slightly more budget options. I think that's the sort of, it's not everyone's choice, but I think that's the sort of mindset I'm going to start going into, and just prioritize less projects but more higher quality. I say this because also I feel like I plan way too many projects regardless. I just don't have as much free time as I think I do, so I might as well just slow down and knit with high quality yarns, and that will be the best use of my time and my money as well. So that's the April cardigan. So I'm hoping that by the next video I can show it done and blocked, and my friend will be able to receive it. I insisted that I could send it to her by post because I'm traveling at the moment, and she was like, no, don't worry, because we're going to see each other for New Year's Eve. Yeah, we'll see. we also have to put some buttons for this, and she actually wanted maybe some gold buttons, which I think would be looking super nice. It will give it a very vintage look to this. It will contrast really well with the black, I think. Now, my last work in progress that I can show you today is my ongoing porcelain sweater cowl with Knit My Daydreams on Instagram. I haven't made too much progress on it since showing it to you last time, but we've got good lighting today, so I think it will be a nice way of showing off the beautiful color work that I've done. I'm really proud of this. I'm loving the yarn choice. I am loving the contrast it creates. I was a bit worried because the white yarn that I picked, which I'll go into the yarn details a bit later, but the white that I picked looked a little bit yellow, but the mohair accompanying it was like a pure white. And so I think that cancelled out the yellow, and that with the fact that it's against quite a blue toned green means the white is like a pure white and not a yellow like white in this color work, which I'm very happy about. So I've mentioned this in the previous podcast. This is my second porcelain sweater. I'm calling it the Porcelain 2.0 for me because I'm basically doing quite a lot of modifications in terms of sizing and also construction to make sure that this one fits me the way I had initially intended to with the first one, but it didn't quite work out the way I wanted to the first time around. So the first porcelain sweater I made, I'll include a picture here, was the traditional white and cobalt blue version, which was on the pictures, and I knit it with Drops Daisy, which had just come out at the time. And while I was very happy with the fabric that it created, Drops Daisy was advertised as a DK, and I think it's more like a light DK. I've compared the strand of Drops Daisy with Sandnes Garn Double Sunday, which was like probably the best, budget. Drops Daisy was probably the best budget alternative, the way it was branded, to Sandnes Garn Double Sunday, especially with the fact that it had the same meterage, 100% non-superwash merino, both of them. But looking at the strands, the Sandnes Garn Double Sunday is definitely a lot plumper, whereas Drops Daisy, I think, has a thinner strand. Therefore, my gauge was quite off. Even though I did a gauge swatch, I think I was kind of in slight delusion, essentially. And especially because also it was my first time doing color work, so it tends to kind of be a bit tighter around the color work areas. I didn't think to change needle size then. So essentially the whole thing meant that instead of having a 21 stitch gauge, I was having a 24 stitch gauge, and I did size up to an M, but I essentially got the sizing of 2 sizes low or something. So there's not much ease on me, and I really wanted to have 25 centimeters of positive ease like it is shown on the model's pictures, even though the pattern then gives you a sizing range that essentially gives you 15 centimeters of positive ease. So there's a slight dissonance between what is shown on the model and what is actually being indicated to knit, which is the first criticism I have of that pattern. The next one is, and this is a suggestion I got from Knit My Daydreams, the construction of the cast-on, from the cast-on to the back, was a bit weird because it makes you do, it's not weird, it's one way of doing it, but she found that there was a better way of doing it. The way you construct the sloping shoulder for drop shoulder in the pattern originally is that you start with the casted stitches for the back neck, and then you go back and forth adding X amount of stitches at each end of row using back loop method to create the slope. But what that did was that it created this stairs look where you had a bit of a gap every time you move on to the next row, and you could see basically where the increases, where the new stitches were made. And that didn't really make for a clean line. So instead, she suggested you just cast on the whole total number of stitches that you end up needing at the end of your shoulder increases. And instead of doing the increases as indicated, you do German short rows. So I could say, for example, in the first row, you knit across the back and you're supposed to cast on 7 new stitches. So instead, what you do with what she suggested is you start at the stitches at the back neck, you knit them, and then you knit an extra 7 stitches and do a German turn, so on and so forth. And that makes for a much cleaner, you could see, you can barely tell where those increases / German short row turns were made. It makes for a much, much cleaner line at the back of your shoulder. So that's exactly what I did, and super happy with it. So I've finished doing the back, and I've finished doing the left front here with the neck increases to shape the neck, And I'm currently doing the right front. So not quite as far in. I still need to continue with the increases for the neck, and then doing a bit of stockinette before I can join by casting on at the neck here to join the two panels at the front. And then I will need to do the same color work here at the back on the front, and then I'll be able to join in the round for the body. And from there on, it will be quite fast. So that was the pattern. So the porcelain sweater, I forgot to mention, it's from Lynette Holmes Samso, the designer, or Lynette, she's called on Instagram. And yeah, just like what she has a tendency to do this, where the jumper that she's wearing on the model pictures for the pattern tend to be a bit more oversized than the positive ease that she actually suggests in the pattern itself. So do watch out for that. Now the yarn that I'm using is tin Peer-Gynt held from Zandis Garn, held with Porcelain Atelier. Super happy with this combination. The tin Peer-Gynt is the original yarn that's recommended in the pattern, and she recommends tin silk mohair by Zandis Garn as the mohair, but I chose Porcelain Atelier because I really like this mohair. I haven't worked with any mohair other than Porcelain Atelier and Drops Kid Silk, so I don't know much about the quality of other more high-end yarn brands mohairs, but so far Porcelain Atelier is such a favorite of mine. I was told that actually Zandis Garn tin silk mohair is a bit scratchy because it has a bit of a wool content. It's not a typical mohair of like X amount of silk and X amount of mohair essentially, because it has a slight amount of wool. So I was told it was a little bit scratchy because of that. So I prefer just sticking to what I knew was good, which was Porcelain Atelier. I've worked on this many times before. It really is such a good yarn. Now, I was struggling a little bit to find a good match for this pine green color in the tin Peer-Gynt. I ended up going with this slightly more bluish green, which created this really wonderful kind of almost, not petrol, but really deep bluish pine green color. I think the combination is fantastic and I'm really happy with it. And as I mentioned, for the white, you can see this one is a bit more yellow, whereas this mohair is a true white. And so the combination of those two made sure that it cancelled out the yellowness, as well as the fact that I'm holding it against some blue tone. Just some basic color theory, essentially. So yeah, super happy with this combination. I have started knitting with Peer-Gynt to knit my Moby sweater, and I really like the feel of the blocked swatch, which I have just here. And so I'm really looking forward to how this will feel against my skin. The tin Peer-Gynt held with Porcelain Atelier. It already feels really soft, and yet it also has a slight rustic quality to it as well. So yeah, I hope tin Peer-Gynt is I think a very durable yarn, and the fact that it's held with a mohair will also make it quite durable. So I'm hoping that this becomes very much a, you know, like a heirloom jumper essentially. And yeah, this time I made sure that my gauge swatch was correct and my tension was the right tension. So like measuring this out, before blocking, I am getting the right dimension for the jumper, the amount of ease that I wanted essentially. Because I've got that fingering weight cardigan that I need to work on as a top priority because it's a gift knit, I haven't been working on this nearly as much as I wanted to, but that's absolutely fine. I will be able to knit on this during the Christmas period, and I think it will be such a nice jumper to knit on in Christmas. It's got a very Christmassy feel to it. So yeah, I think basically when the holiday season kicks in, I think I'm hoping to finish this by then, essentially. That concludes my works in progress. I can show, actually, hold on. Now, earlier in this episode, I mentioned that I have a second April cardigan to knit up for another friend as a gift knit. And I thought it would be nice to show the yarn that I was gonna use for that. So this is Filcolana alvetta. It's technically sock yarn because it's got 80% superwash wool and 20% nylon, but it's a fingering weight yarn with 210 meter. This is the color 811, which is like a lovely petrol bluish green. And the reason I picked this is because I've worked with Filcolana alvetta. It's super soft, but it's got the advantage of being machine washable and in a gentle 30-degree cycle. And the friend who is receiving the April cardigan knitted and this one really wanted something that was easy to care for, whereas the one who is receiving the cardigan knitted and knitting for the merino, which you cannot put in the washing machine, didn't mind the extra hassle so much because she wanted a high quality object. Not to say that this is not going to be high quality. On the contrary, it's super nice yarn, just a little bit easier to care for than something non-superwash. So I'm still debating whether I'm going to also make this April cardigan in the fingering weight gauge. I will make a swatch with this, but also I will make a swatch using 2 strands held double, and I'll ask my friend which garment thickness she prefers. I'm hoping she tells me she prefers the one with held double, which means it will be a DK gauge, which means it will be faster to knit. So yeah, that's the plan essentially. Now this concludes my knitting podcast. I hope you enjoyed seeing my finished object and my various works in progress. I'll try to make another episode when my black cardigan is finished so I can show it blocked and stuff like that. And yeah, unfortunately, there probably won't be much variation in the projects that I show because I will still probably be not reunited yet with my full yarn stash in my old projects before the next episode. But I'm looking forward to the Christmas period when I will be reunited with all of my other yarns so I can show some different projects. Mainly, I really want to finish my Moby sweater this holiday season, or at least I get a good amount of progress on it alongside finishing this porcelain sweater. So that will be also a very interesting one to mention in future podcasts. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure to click subscribe, comment down below if you see anything that you like or if you have any questions, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!